I'm James, and this is Producing Fun, a podcast about making games from a product perspective. Welcome to Producing Fun. My guest this week is Chris Kingsnorth, game developer and organiser of the Nottingham protospiel. I was keen to interview Chris for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, Chris fills a key knowledge gap that the show has had for a while. We've never interviewed a game developer before, despite the critical but often misunderstood role that developers play in the industry. Second, Chris's story in the industry is a really interesting one. A practicing pediatric doctor until very recently, and working right now on a special educational game designed to be used in a medical context, Chris has thrown himself in at the deep end of games in no time at all. In the grand scheme of things, he's pretty new to tabletop, not discovering his first modern board game till about 2015. But by 2019, he was already organising a convention for other game designers and developers. That's exactly the kind of passion we like around here. As you could imagine, we had a lot to talk about. Chris is an eloquent advocate for game developers, a dream role he works full-time in. He has much to say about the process of taking a game from really good to great, working closely as he does with Henry Audubon, designer of smash hit parks, on Henry's new title, Cosmoctopus. This episode ends up being a perfect encapsulation of the game developer role and what goes on behind the scenes at the publisher after a game is signed. If you want to understand this and the development process better, or you want to organise a convention yourself, this episode is for you. We join just as Chris is explaining his method of finding time to get into the industry.
Kind of very much what I started doing when I didn't have much time, but I did really want to do game stuff, and it's kind of a bit less sleep and a bit more games is kind of the approach that I took.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it, when you're starting out, because very few people in games actually are full-time employed in games, right?
Very much so. And finding people to get advice from about that is difficult because it's such a hobbyist industry kind of overall, and because so many of the people get into it by playing games first rather than being sort of employed in it. Yeah, knowing what the route into games looks like can be very difficult. It's like going into it but no one's made the map yet. It's that part off the edge of the map no one's drawn. You've got a vague idea of how people get there, but it's all hearsay rather than actual, this is how you do it.
Do you think there will ever be a map?
I think it's such a nebulous sort of role, being whether it be a game designer or a publisher or developer, that I don't think there is. And I think it's still such a small industry that a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time, but also putting yourself in a position where opportunities present themselves. And it always makes me think of the phrase, the harder I work, the luckier I get, which I think is something that stuck with me when I heard it in the past, in that, you know, you can set yourself up for things to go well. It doesn't mean it'll always happen, but doing that can set you in good stead. And that was very much kind of how I got into things. I was in the right place at the right time, having done some things in the past that set me up, which I didn't even realize was going to happen.
Because you're now, are you mostly employed in games now? Is this a full-time gig for you, or mostly kind of a part-time thing?
It's full-time for me now. So I am now, 5 days a week. I am developing, designing, doing bits of everything, I suppose, at Stone Sword and the sister company Paperfort, which is what I head up. So yeah, I'm full-time now, which I realize is an incredibly honor, sort of it's an honor to do, and a very lucky position to be in, to be able to do that. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting, because I think very few people are full-time developers, especially. And actually, I'm sort of realized, thinking back, we've not yet interviewed anyone on the show who is primarily, first and foremost, a game developer, which is, I feel like, is a great pity so far that we've not done this, because I think this is a fascinating and often poorly understood role, I think, compared to a game designer. If I say what a game designer does, people have an image of someone coming up with a concept, drawing, maybe making a few, sketching out of prototypes, taking it to playtesting events, and then eventually getting published. The dream, you get the contract, your game sells 10 million units a year, and you're a millionaire. Okay, that's not very many people at all. but that at least the concept of and the ideal of a designer is quite clear. What do you understand a game developer to be?
So I'm still learning what that means. And I think it means different things for different individuals, but also for different companies, depending on their size and their, to use a sort of term used in business, their agility. So, do you have a role which is just a developer, or do you have a role that is developer amongst a myriad of other roles that you take on, whether that be for a few minutes a day or a few days a week or whatever? And I'm very much in a role, because we're a very small company, of I'm a developer in that the game I'm working on was actually signed before I joined the company, and it was given to me in a kind of, here's a game we want to publish. It's great. Take the stuff we've got and make it happen. And that's very much the kind of the starting point for this. So development of the game and sort of the additional play testing and working with artists to get art, project management, things like that, all come under my role of development at this company. However, I know there are people like John Brieger, for example, who they are developers specifically. They do the development role and then hand things back to a company to do the art and the project management and all of those kind of things. So as we were saying, I think these roles aren't particularly well defined in the industry as a whole, and especially not when you've got small companies where lots of people are not available to do different roles.
Yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it? That I guess your role is understandably, like most small companies, is one that encompasses a lot of different things. I've heard that definition as well, where people talk about a kind of development role that also includes what you might term art direction, which obviously would have its own role in a much larger organization. Let's talk more about that developer part of it, because I guess that is that your main? That must be your main time then. Must be your kind of principal thing you're doing.
I'd say that's most of my time, yes. So the best way for me to tell you about it is probably to kind of give you an idea of how I started and the game that I've been developing and how the steps that I'm taken towards getting that to become a product, because at the end of the day, that's part of what a developer does, is getting it to make it a marketable product that people enjoy. So when I came to the company, I was given the game in its prototype form.
And which game is this? Can you talk about it at this stage?
Yeah, this is Cosmoctopus. So it's a game by Henry Audubon, the designer of Parks. People are probably known for that. And this was his lockdown design. And it's about being devotees to a cute but all-powerful celestial octopus. And it's a tentacle gathering engine building game.
A tentacle gathering game. So is this a new genre?
Maybe it is. This could be the birth of this new genre of engine building games we're designing, perhaps. So that was the game that was given to me in very good shape. Obviously, as a developer, sometimes you'll be given games that have promise, but they need a lot of work. And sometimes you'll have games that have, pretty much there, and you're just doing the final polishing and sort of chamfering off the edges. And in this case, it was definitely the latter. So I was given the prototype game, and essentially then spent a fair few hours just playing it through myself, playing it through with Henry to just understand the game. Because a designer has spent many hours and days and months on a game, and they have a certain vision for it that as a developer, when you come in, it definitely pays to try and get inside their head and understand that vision of why they designed the game and when they designed the game. For example, this one was during lockdown, and Henry will admit himself, you can definitely tell that he'd been maybe indoors for longer than normal. It's a little bit unusual and esoteric, and with some bizarre things going on. And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand the world he'd made, because I'm going to be making changes to it, but I want them to be ones that make the game better for everybody. I don't want to be coming in gung-ho and changing it to make it look, work well on paper, but actually it moves away too much from his vision. But also, you've got to change things. That's the whole role of a developer, that you've got to make changes so that you can get it to a place where people can actually buy it and will want to buy it, and it gets out to people who are interested in it. So a lot of my time is spent playtesting, and as a developer, playtesting as well as changing the game balance and things like that also is a bit of market research, and it's talking to people about whether they like the look of the game and how it makes them feel when they play it, so that you can position it as a product in the marketplace. What target market are you going for? What age group? Those kind of things, which are often suggested by a designer. I think when they're designing a game, generally they've got that in mind. It's just making sure that you then make sure it does fit with that suggested market, or you change it to fit with something that fits your company's set of games or ethos, things like that. That's a big part of it.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people think of game development as specifically the game itself. And you can imagine that some of that makes a lot of sense. It would be good to go into some examples, I guess, if we can go into a little bit more detail, the kind of things you change. But I would guess, if I think about development that we do at Nader Games, would be around things like small rules changes, optimization or explanation. It might be modifying something in a turn order, the way that bidding works, sort of small changes here and there that are designed to improve the product and to but retain the feel and the vision of that thing. But you're going a little bit further there, and obviously telling me, well, of course, this is very much a product podcast. So I inevitably will always use that word, but I actually think a lot of people don't think very much about that when they're thinking about game development, which is that you're actually talking about, well, there are questions here about product market fit that your job is partly to address. What kind of product market fit questions were you addressing with Cosmoctopus? Because one of the issues there straight away you raised is that this is something that may be a little bit more esoteric than some of his previous work. And then that immediately raises questions for me about, well, where's that going to fit?
Exactly. So one of the first things that had been suggested actually before I'd even joined the company was that we wanted this game to stand out from other games which might be felt to have a similar theme to this. So there are a number of games about esoteric orders of people who believe in certain beings, Cthulhu being a big example and being one of those themes that's used quite a lot through the market. We felt this was similar to that, but we wanted to take it in a different direction. And that's actually where we came up with the idea that this being, this Cosmoctopus, could actually not be your world-ending, terrifying creature, but maybe more of a space toddler who's wandered off from the brood. And that was one of the early changes we made, to think, how can we grab people's attention on the shelf with this product? What if this octopus, and thinking of the cover in advance, was kind of this cute Dumbo octopus-esque, almost Disney character within this scene of devotees that clearly look quite serious, poking a little bit of fun at that kind of Cthulhu mythos vibe, while also appealing to two different markets at once, because you get the people who think, oh, that's a cute character, what's going on there? And that draws them in. And then as they get closer, they see, oh, this is a game with, there's some people down the bottom that look like devotees, and that's a bit strange. And oh, the cards have got these weird and wonderful things on. That was one of the things that we brought in. And with that, we very much wanted to kind of get, if this game was on someone's shelf, what makes it stand out from all the other games that's on their shelf? Not only the character, but the color palette and things like that, which comes into art direction, of course. And that was then a really good basis as we developed the game for us to have an idea of the target market. And also, can we make this a product that someone could play with their children around the dinner table, and a gamer group who want to be a bit more mean to each other could also play? And how do we bake that in from the beginning rather than that being a tagged on thing at the end?
Interesting. And that clearly involves some sort of thematic change. Was it previous? So it was more Cthulhu-esque at the beginning?
So Cosmoctopus was very much a serious octopus who was more towards your Cthulhu. To be fair to Henry, he'd made wonderful, like, there's lore in this game that's great, that you don't need to know it, but if you know it, it's kind of hidden in the game. And so I haven't changed very much at all from that point of view, because it was already really good. But yeah, it was mainly that the octopus, Cosmoctopus, was kind of this potentially very scary being that lived in space.
Right. Okay. And so making it a lot more fun.
Yes.
It's interesting in terms of that approach to thinking about market fit as well. So you're thinking primarily about people seeing the box. In what context are you thinking about that?
So I'm thinking about it from 2 points of view, because I think that with games as they are today and with small companies, generally you're going to have a game that starts off on Kickstarter and then goes into retail, hopefully, would be the thing. So you've got two different things there, because people that buy games from Kickstarter never see the box on a shelf before they back it. They see a front cover, and you need to kind of capture them with what that front cover shows, not what it looks like compared to other products, because it won't sit next to those directly. But also I wanted to think about the fact that if I went into a board game cafe or a board game shop and there were 100 games on the shelf, which one would stick out to me as being different or unusual enough that it would make me pick it up? And I think it's that getting someone to pick up a game and flip it over is the key to selling games in those kind of situations. So that's why I was trying to think those two different kind of situations. How could I make something that kind of grabs the attention in both domains, I suppose?
Makes sense. And what kind of gameplay changes did you have to make to bring all of this into line?
So not very many, if I'm honest with you. So the core of the engine building like premise that Henry had designed was very solid from the beginning. Many of the tweaks we made were finding, by playing it lots and lots of times, the odd loop, which was kind of exploitative for this kind of game where you can combo things up, finding ones where, oh, actually, wait a second, if I happen to get these two cards and be able to afford them and play them at the same time, which is rare but will happen, now the game's broken. So just finding a couple of little things like that, which until you play it hundreds of times, you're not going to find. And then trying to marry up the kind of theme and the world that Henry had created. From a gameplay point of view, we also, Henry always had the idea this game from the beginning has a solo mode in it. And actually what we've kind of done is that the character that is a small deck of cards who makes the game a solo game, you can actually introduce into any multiplayer game, and it turns it from a competitive to a cooperative game. So it means that you've got solo play and you've got multiplayer play, and depending on your game group, you can pivot between whether it's you're working against each other or you're working together. And thematically, it's a private investigator who's coming to find out what you all know about this mysterious celestial cephalopod, and you essentially are putting aside your differences because now he's more of a threat than each of the other devotees are. And that's kind of thematically.
Of course, because the private investigators might put an end to your little cult.
Precisely.
I guess so that you need to presumably somehow avoid him. That's the idea.
And so we brought that in and we tightened up the kind of solo rules to really simple, but we can also introduce it into the multiplayer. And we also had some new ideas about, well, actually, if the private investigator's learning more, he's going to get more powerful because he's going to get more knowledge. So now why don't we have cards where when he reaches a threshold, he now becomes more powerful all of a sudden? So you have to think about if he reaches that, what's going to happen. So we added in a investigator's notebook where he, as he gains tentacles himself, suddenly he's a bit confused, but then suddenly he has a revelation and the cards flip, and now he changes the rule of the game to make it feel like, oh no, now he's accelerating, now he knows what we're doing. So we added that in as well, which was a nice little additional thing which just adds a bit of flavor to the game and that sense of pressure, which in these kind of games is quite nice, I think.
So how does all of that fit though into your kind of product market fit question? Because remind me again what you're kind of going for. So is it more of a family title, or is it where do you see it fitting exactly?
So I think that it fits generally in, it's one of those ones that it straddles two different things. The prime example of that is that at UK Games Expo, we had the front cover on the banners. We also had a 4-meter inflatable tentacle, which does garner some attention. But essentially, people came for the poster and came for that and stayed for the game and really enjoyed it. And what was nice is you had kids coming across who saw the cute character and thinking, oh, I want to find out what this is about. But then the parents that got closer who were then like, oh, this is unusual. What's going on here? I love the card art and love this kind of thing. Shall we sit down and play a game? So from a product fit point of view, adding those gameplay changes essentially means that I can play this game with my wife who's not a big gamer, and we can have a 40-minute 2-player game that we can blast out. But equally, I can take it to my regular gaming group who will happily play Twilight Imperium, and we can play against the private investigator on the top level of difficulty, and we can be as mean as we want to each other. And that, having that dial allowing people to turn, means that hopefully we kind of can target it towards people who are new to games, but also people who are very into games.
Makes sense. Are you at all concerned sometimes with this, that it might not quite nail the experience for either of those markets? Because I can see the best of both worlds argument, but I can also see the worst of both worlds argument.
Of course, and there's always going to be that risk. And I think that that's why getting it out there and showing people and getting people to play it early is a really good way of doing it. And actually, it's important, especially when you're doing Kickstarter thing, to explain to people why it's like that and the fact that it does have these things that you can do to do it. And having play tested it with loads of different groups, with a young family versus 4 people who didn't even talk to each other and they just wanted to beat each other, like just absolutely blast through it. They've both got different things out of this game that they've really enjoyed. And some of the hardcore gamers have said to me, this game I will happily play with my gaming group and I'd show it to my kids. And I think it's just introducing people to the idea that these games can exist, that you can have a game which can be malleable enough that you can play it with different groups, which I think sometimes games try to do and it doesn't work. So it's just us working really hard to show and to prove that it does work. And you can do it if you design things in the right way.
Have you had any difficulty sometimes working with Henry in terms of there's something that he's quite committed to that wants to be in the game, and then you've had to sort of say, well, that doesn't fit quite what we need to do from a product perspective. What's it been like working through those issues, if they indeed have occurred?
So it's been brilliant working with Henry. It's one of those things that as a part of my job, I've come into this and my first game is getting to develop Henry Audubon's game. No pressure, but no, it's one of the things that I've really enjoyed it, and he's great to work with. There are always going to be things where there is a kind of meeting of minds where we think this direction works and it might be different to the direction that you thought that things might end up going. And being kind of open about it is important. From a gameplay perspective, actually, I don't think we've really ever had any problems with that. We're both on the same track with regards to the gameplay. We both understand the game well. I can see where he's going with things. And I'm also, because I realize this is kind of a passion project for him too, taking the time to listen to why certain cards are designed in a certain way and things has been a really important part of my learning process as a new developer. There are cards in the game where I was like, oh, this card should probably be a bit more expensive. It's a bit too this. And Henry told me, oh, it's based on this specific thing from another game. And it's a bit of an homage to that. And then making it work. So not to the detriment of the game, but me understanding that that's important and taking that on board. When it comes to sort of the game as a product and the art and things like that, we obviously suggested changing Cosmoctopus from being this scary thing into this sort of cuter thing. And that's a very big change. That's a big change to kind of the vibe of it. But it's one of those things I think was kind of, if we're going to make this stand out and we're going to sell it to people, we've got to go with what people like and what they're telling us and what we're getting feedback about. And there's been some to and fro about the sort of how we present that. And we're at a stage now where I think we've got the balance and we've still got time. This is the thing, I think with Kickstarter, it's always one of those things you want to get as much done as you can. And you feel like the start of the Kickstarter is the end point, when actually, within reason, there are small things that can be tweaked here and there afterwards. But overall, we've not had any big sort of problems. From a sort of art direction point of view, it's a kind of almost like a love triangle a little, because you've got a developer / art director who's me in this kind of role. You've got the designer who's designed this for months, who has a very specific vision in their head. And then you have a third party being the artist who has their own thoughts and techniques and things they do, and finding a way that you can bring those three things together to make something that works for everybody is a big challenge, and I think is always a big challenge, unless you're doing something where it's your design and you can control it and you don't need to ask anybody else what they think about it. That's different. But being in a situation where you have to get those three things in tandem can be tricky. But I like these challenges. I actually think that they teach you a lot about how to make something that works for everybody, but also about when you need to make decisions for the game and to make the game the best experience it can be for everybody, and when you need to say, this is the stage we're at now, we're going to focus on something different.
That must be quite difficult sometimes, though, isn't it, to draw that line of where are you going to say, we can't take this any further, we can't afford to keep fiddling here.
And it is, and it's really tricky because I would in a perfect world, I think any developer, any publisher would be like, right, we want to get this 100%. Everybody loves absolutely every single little thing about this as a product, as a game. That will never happen. I think that is a goal which, if you pursue it, will end up with people being just as unhappy, but for different reasons. And I think you have to have a point at which you're like, we've got to make a decision now, whether that be because of time constraints or it be monetary or other reasons, or you're just really convinced that you've hit the thing that you need to hit. And you just have to have faith in what people are telling you. But it makes it no easier. It's still very difficult because just in general, as a person, I like to, make people happy and please people. And I think that most people who are into games, they generally fairly affable people who want to, be social and be happy. And sometimes you have to step outside that persona to make decisions, which is part of the role and part of the difficulty, but also why you have a team around you. And obviously, I'm lucky here that I've got a team of the 6 of us in total, which for a board game company is an indie board game company is a fair number of staff. And it means that I have other people I can bounce ideas off and that I can just sort of check in with and just say, sanity check, am I completely off the rails here, or is what I'm saying kind of making sense? And I will happily, if people say to me, no, you've got that wrong, I'll be like, cool, let me reassess, let me find out what we're doing. Because I think that's important, to have other people to check what you're doing rather than just going full steam ahead with your own ideas.
Yeah, makes sense. With Kickstarter, you raised a really important point, I think, about how the beginning of the Kickstarter, it's tending to think of it like that's the end of the process, but actually that's just one of many stages in the process. How do you go about deciding what needs to be locked in before the Kickstarter starts and what can still remain a little bit kind of loosey-goosey?
So from my point of view, I think that gameplay needs to be very, very close to being done, like to the point that, like, unless you're thinking of adding things to your Kickstarter which are going to change the way the game plays, I would want that to be like as much done as possible. I think there's an argument for having some wriggle room because Kickstarter can be a collaborative process with your backers, and having that not set in stone and a few things, if someone suddenly suggests something amazing that no one's thought of so far, being open to that as an option is definitely still really important. But I think going in with only 50% done and then having the other 50% be sort of designed by everybody else feels a little bit on the difficult size. So from my point of view, gameplay needs to be like nailed to the point where I could easily make this game today and people would play it and they would have a great time. That, from my personal point of view. I think that from an art point of view, you have a little bit more wriggle room with Kickstarter, depending on the amount of money your company's got and things like that. You want to have enough art done that you can show people this is what the end product's going to look like. And if it's not exactly like this is a fair representation of what you're going to get through your letterbox at the end of the process. So I think that's important to have that. And I think that having the plan for what the product's going to be like physically is really important. I know that on Kickstarter it can be really easy to, in the adrenaline of it, be like, we're going to add this and we're going to add this stretch goal and these bits and pieces, and suddenly a box that was your average box size is now twice as heavy, or it's twice as large, or now you've got 3 envelopes with extra stuff in. And that can be difficult because you want to give people more stuff, but especially at the moment, not locking that in can have effects on your shipping cost, on how long people have to wait. And I think for me personally, I want to have the product to the point where it's almost completely done, so that I know, one, I can get files off to printers sooner. I can say to people, this is a pretty accurate representation of what you're going to get and how much it's going to cost you, because I think at the moment that's even more important with how things are. And to that end, from this game, we decided on the size of the box at the very beginning, and we have stuck with that. And any changes we've made, I have been like, this is not going over this amount of punch boards. This is not going over this amount of cards. And if we need to change things, we need to find ways to do it with the limits we've already got. And that's really important because I think it stops that sort of product creep of like, oh, now there's another extra this amount and that. And then you suddenly realize now the box is a bit bigger and that makes it now 2.1 kilos and you're in a different bracket for shipping and all these kind of things. So keeping that in check has been really important, I think, and something I've tried to build in from kind of day one. And then I suppose the other thing from a gameplay perspective is that you can approach things like solo modes and what some people see as kind of add-on gameplay value as either something you bake in from the beginning or something which you decide if there's X amount of people that would like that, whether that's through stretch goals or whatever, we will find a way to make it work. And for me, it was really important to kind of work that in from the beginning. But Henry had already done that. So I think it was easy for me to make that decision because there was already a solo mode in this game, for example. I don't need to retrospectively do that.
Because that was the he wanted in it from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you go about signing Henry for this? What was the process by which did he come to you? How did it work?
So it happened before I got here, but I know the story.
Okay.
So actually, I believe it was at PAX Unplugged last year that Henry had taken his prototype and a sell sheet, and it was seen by, I think it was Hungry Gamer, who had contacted James, our director, with a picture of the sell sheet. And he said, you need to find out about this game. It's great. And there was very little about it anywhere at that point. Like there was just that photo on Facebook somewhere, I believe. But Henry had been playing it at that point. And James basically said to Henry, I want to know about this game. Let's hear about it. And very quickly signed it from hearing it, from having a vibe of what it is and knowing that Henry's got pedigree as a game designer as well. So it was signed fairly quickly. And then when I came on board, it was my project. And I was like, this is Cosmoctopus. This is your thing to take and sail with. So yeah, that was the signing process. It was an interesting one in that it wasn't directly pitched to the company, and it was through somebody else that we ended up finding out about its existence, which is nice. I think those kind of fortuitous things are both nice for publishers to know that you can do it that way, and also nice for designers to know that obviously the traditional route is that you do it and you go and pitch it to somebody. But if someone sees something and they think it's good, there is always a chance they will come and find it if all the stars align and someone recommends it to them or they see it or whatever.
Well, yeah, well, you got that recommendation as well, that's pretty great, right? When someone else who knows games pretty well is able to go, I think you should take a look at this. That's pretty good.
And I think it's having people who, if they come to you and say this is a good game, and you know that they play similar games or you trust their judgment on things, listening to them and taking it on board and not batting it away is really important from a publisher's standpoint, because you can miss some gems. I think there's lots of games out there that are potential like amazing games and they just don't get picked up because they never come into the orbit of the publishing world.
Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, that's really cool. Really, really cool. Well, that sounds like tremendously interesting being able to work on a project like that. I think especially with a well-known designer who's got, as you said, such a pedigree, I think is a good way to put it.
Yeah, definitely. As I say, it's been an honor from my point of view. It's one of those things where not only have I been given a game to develop by somebody like Henry, but it's a game I actually would love. It's the kind of game I play. So it's not like I've been given a game as a developer and I'm like, it's not really my kind of game, but I can develop it. It's my kind of game, which gives me more passion to work on it, which I think then circles back into a better product overall. I think there's a lot to be said for developing games you're actually really interested in, because you think about things in a different way and you're willing to kind of try different things that you might not in a game style you don't usually play, for example.
What kind of developing work were you doing before this one? Because this is the first you've been doing at Stone Sword. What were you kind of doing before that?
So before this, I've mainly been doing my own stuff. So I have basically been in the right place at the right time, having built some groundwork previously. So my background is that I'm actually a pediatric doctor. So I trained.
This is very tangential to game design.
Definitely. So I went to medical school. I've been a doctor since 2013, and I had been doing game stuff in my spare time for the past 5 or 6 years, which medicine led me to that because I was out at a hospital a bit in the middle of nowhere with some colleagues, and we stayed there in accommodation and we started playing games as a way to pass the time because there was nothing else to do. I went to UK Games Expo, learned about playtesting, and then just started devouring anything that I could find about game design, so ludology, reading books, like anything I could find. Started entering some BGG contests and doing some work for other people who saw my designs and said, oh, I've got a game that like that part would work really well for. Could you design this system for me for this game? And then my next kind of step towards things was that I organised Protospiel Nottingham in 2019, which kind of pulled me into the Nottingham Industry Collective group, who are design studios and designers in Nottingham, who were like, who's this person we've never heard of doing a Protospiel? You should come along. You should come along to our meetings and find out about things. And that pulled me in. And through that event, I got the bug for designing games and doing development here and there. And essentially, when I got to the point where there was an opportunity for me to take a year out of medicine, I was like, if I don't try this, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life, because there's many reasons that medicine's not, you know, it as people can imagine, I'm sure it's very stressful, and there's lots of other reasons, and hours and things like that are not great. But it's mainly that I suddenly realized I had a passion that I never knew existed. And looking back, like, my granddad was an art teacher and an artist, and I've got a lot of creative people in my family, and maybe actually that's what I was always meant to do, but I went down a certain path. So when I came over into this world, I thought maybe I should take the chance, and I made a tabletop CV. Never had to do a CV before. Medicine doesn't work like that. And I sent it to James here because I'd met him at Protospiel a few years ago. And it wasn't that I was looking for a job. I just said, would you mind looking at this? Because I'm going to send out to some people, and I'd like to get your feedback on it. And he was like, oh, we just had a really successful Kickstarter and we're going to need some more people. How would you feel about coming and working for us? And it happened to be exactly the right time and a 40-minute walk from my house. And I could not ever say, I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah. How could I ever say no to that? And that's kind of how I ended up in this, where I am now. So I've definitely taken a turn from where I was, but a good one from my point of view.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's just absolutely, well, as you said, right place, right time. But to be fair, obviously with all of that experience as well, organizing that Protospiel, you must have met so many people through that process, I'd have thought. How many attendees was that first one?
So the 2019 one, I think there were 45 people. So it's not huge, but it was the first one in the UK. And I've never organized anything like that before. So I was like, the only way I'm going to find out if it is viable is to just try it. So I paid the venue cost and hoped I could recoup it. And I organized it, and it went really well. And Protospiel's are not for profit. So after I paid for all the stuff, I gave all the money, and we made 950 quid for charity. And I thought, wow, we've done it. And people loved the day. And I was like, met lots of people. And so it was a small event then, but people wanted it to come back. And I had grand plans to bring it back in 2020. And then obviously we couldn't. And then this year, we've finally into a situation where we can do it. And we've got a bigger venue. We're doing 2 days. We're hoping to have 100 people per day, and hopefully raise at least twice as much for charity. So,
and when is that again?
That is on Bonfire Weekend, so 5th and 6th of November this year in Nottingham, Nottingham City Centre. So yeah, that will be 2 days, and people come for 1 or 2, and they can come as a designer, bring their own stuff, or they can come as a playtester. And the thing that's different about Protospiels is generally it's lots of designers testing with lots of other designers. So not only can people tell you what's wrong with your game, but they might actually have a way of fixing it, which is the bonus to some other playtests. But what's great is the UK, we're very lucky. We've got Playtest UK that do regular events. They're fantastic. We started doing a Break My Game one in Nottingham. So I think now what we're trying to do is the more the merrier from my point of view, the more opportunities that there are for people to play test stuff. And if we can raise a bit of money for charity in the process, then everyone wins. So yeah, that's why I'm doing it this year. It's going to be bigger. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, because that was my first proper foray into doing tabletop stuff. So it's got a sort of, I've got a soft spot in my heart for doing that event and for making it special for everybody.
So what was the gap between sort of starting to make your own games and then deciding that the logical step, if you've just been making a few things that you've got into quite recently, right? You're talking about, was it, you said like 2015? Was that kind of the kind of time you started getting into games in general?
Yeah.
To thinking, what I need to now is organize effectively a miniature game making festival.
So it
That
was.
seems like pretty quick turnaround from that
It
to that.
was, yeah. So it was about 2.5 years or so, I think, between me kind of like starting to learn, basically from me starting to play games and learn about game design to doing protospiel. And it was a bit of an accident. I remember specifically, I was walking home from work one day and I was listening to the Game Crafter podcast. I'd accidentally put it from oldest to newest. And the oldest episode on that list was how to run a protospiel. And it was aimed at the US because there are lots of protospiels in the US. And because the Game Crafter support them, it was basically, this is how you would do it.
It's a kind of brand, isn't it?
It is.
The protospiel, it's a kind of, and it's actually, presumably when you organize one, you actually have to license it, do you? Is that how it works?
It's not. So it's kind of open source, if you like, in that you, as long as you represent the ethos of protospiel, which is not for profit and it's reciprocal playtesting, no one like owns specific parts of the playtesting, you can essentially do it. I did reach out to the people that organized it and I did ask them, and there's lots of information on various protospiel websites about how to run your own. So the info was there, but what wasn't there is the fact that no one's ever done one in the UK. I didn't know if anyone knew what protospiels were. I didn't really know like what kind of venues we do it in. What I get the vibe that in the US, there's a lot more kind of convention centers or hotels that do events where rooms to do this kind of thing are potentially cheaper or easier to find. And I think that was one of my major challenges, was finding a venue to do it that was somewhere people could get to, that was accessible, that had like the stuff we needed and the dates that were available. And so, yeah, it kind of happened by accident, but I was like, well, I can keep thinking about whether it's going to work or not, or I can just try and do it and find out. And I decided to go for the latter option. So I kind of fell into it, but once I decided to do it, I decided to see it through to the end. And if it went well, great. And if it didn't, then now I know. And I think I'm very much that kind of person that I'd rather try it out and find if it works rather than wonder whether it was ever going to.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, it makes sense. That's the way to do it, isn't it? Is to find out. I mean, that's, dare I say, the soul of playtesting, is that iterative, constant, try it out. Is it going to fail or not? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a mindset kind of thing that I like that kind of challenge. And maybe that's what drew me to games and design and even event management, very much that kind of vibe of you do all the preparation and hope people come, right? That's the kind of way it works. So
yeah, and definitely with events, there's also always inevitably some kind of on the day things. Maybe something isn't worked 100%. There's an issue that you just could not have foreseen that comes up, even if your planning is really good.
Exactly.
And suddenly you're firefighting something, and there's a little bit of iteration in that process as well.
There is, yeah. That's playtesting of the event rather than a playtesting event.
Yes, the playtesting of the event itself. And how many people do you think are you, dare I say it, obviously you may not want to say it, how many people are you expecting for this Protospiel 2022?
So I've got room and therefore would like 100 attendees per day. So obviously some people might get a 2-day ticket, so they might come across both days. But I would like to have sort of like turnstile 100 attendees per day, because I think that the space can take it. That'll be a really nice atmosphere without it being too chaotic. And also it means that we could essentially, at the end of the day, the more people that come, the more money we can make for charity and more play testers that can be there and more games that can get tested. So it's one of those, the more the merrier kind of vibes.
And how beneficial is it being located in that sort of effectively the center of games, at least as far as tabletop war games go, in the UK in Nottingham?
So it is a great place to do it. Nottingham's an interesting place from a tabletop perspective because so it used to be known as the Lead Belt because it was where Games Workshop started. And so you have lots of either current or past employees of Games Workshop who either have splintered off and done their own game design things, or they are doing it as well as working for Games Workshop. What's interesting is we didn't have any regular playtesting events until about 6 months ago in Nottingham. And it's one of those things that when I joined and I was doing Protospiel, I was like, oh, people aren't doing this kind of thing in Nottingham, which is interesting. From a being central point of view, it's great for travel for people because that's the great thing. We're in the middle of the country, right? So it's further up than Birmingham. So if you're a bit further up than that, it's easy to get to, and it's pretty much central, easy to get to from London and things. I do realise it's not easy for people to come down from Scotland, and I do feel like they sometimes do get short shrift if you come from Scotland, because there's only certain events for that. But obviously it made sense for me to organise it here because it's where I live, and it means I can physically go and look at venues and find out things, and I know the town and I know the transport links to be able to recommend to people. I couldn't have done Protospiel, the first one, without the Nottingham Tabletop Industry Collective. So there's lots of different people involved in that. There's Needy Cat Games, so James Hewitt and Sophie, and they were so kind to invite me to that, not knowing who I was, and saying, do you want to come along to this? You might meet some people who know some stuff, because I didn't know anything back then. I was very naive, but had an idea of what I could do. And with their support and the support of other people I met through that, I've been able to do loads of stuff. So doing it in Nottingham, for me, had I never done it in Nottingham and never done Protospiel, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So it's one of those things that it's lots of things that fall into place that I could never have controlled, but brought me to this point, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense. What was the first tabletop collective event that you attended then? Because I've been once, I think, so far. Obviously, it's a little bit further for me because I'm down based in South London, so
of course
it's a little bit more complicated for me. But yeah, what was the first one you went to?
I think it was one of their breakfasts. So they tended to, pre-COVID, they did like an industry collective breakfast, and it was usually about 8:30, 9 o'clock on like a Wednesday morning until 10ish. And then they also did ones in the evening. And it was one of the breakfasts that I managed to get to, because back then I was doing medicine. So my shift times were like all over the place.
Yeah.
So being able to do something on a certain day was tricky, but also I did have days where I knew I wasn't in work, so I could go to those kind of things. And I just happened to have one day that I went, and I sort of went, and they did a nice thing where at the start they generally get people just introduce themselves and say a little something. And that kind of kicked it off, and people were interested and they wanted to hear more about the ideas I had and for it. And yeah, it was lovely. There were some local companies that supported sponsoring the event for banners and things like that. And again, all those little things added up to me being able to do that event, which I would never have been able to do, like just me as a silo. So yeah, doing it in Nottingham is one of those things that it feels like it's the natural place to do it, but actually from playtesting events until recently, Nottingham's actually been not the hub of that compared to other cities by the looks of it. But we're slowly making changes to that and improving that situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, right? I find this quite surprising because it is such a central place in the United Kingdom for this kind of game development, I guess. But I guess with the skew towards war games and miniatures and those kind of pieces, it's a bit different, right? Like I feel like the explosion recently in designing games has been a lot more about designing board games than it's been about designing war games, which I think its sort of hobby heyday was probably more like the 70s and 80s, to be honest.
I feel like that's definitely a part of it. And I think that the Venn diagram of war gamers and board gamers, obviously there is some crossover, but the Venn diagram of war gamers and board gamers who would be interested in coming to a playtesting event for board games is a much smaller sliver.
Yes, by definition, that's an even tighter circle, isn't it, with a small overlap.
And so I feel that that's probably why those worlds didn't meet for Protospiel specifically, but there are people who came to it who also do loads of wargaming. And I think having the option to bring those two worlds together in Nottingham is a really unique sort of situation that you don't get in other cities. And we're currently trying to kind of bring those worlds together with kind of the companies that are coming out of Nottingham and the fact that Games Workshop are here, and yeah, trying to work together with local companies to do those kind of things and make it more of a hub for both, well, just tabletop games in general. So whether that be war, board, card, RPGs, whatever you cast under that umbrella.
Well, certainly, I met quite a lot of people there, for example, who are artists and graphic designers who specialize in the game space because of Games Workshop and other companies. So you can see that there's like a lot of related skills there. But I still find that fact they hadn't done any playtesting recently quite fascinating, because I think about, here in Croydon, in South London, we have a playtest event that happens every single week. And it's one that we do that has sometimes up to 15 people attend it. And we're getting that week in, week out. And I think, wow, we have that. Nottingham doesn't until recently have something like that. It's kind of quite extraordinary in some ways. I think maybe partly we have such a fantastic resource in the Ludicrous here in Croydon as well. which makes an enormous difference in terms of having like literally the world's best board game cafe, according to Gamma, at least. So that definitely is wonderful to have that here. That's really fantastic. Now, I understand you've actually also been working on a game that has a bit more of a kind of, dare I say, utilitarian and practical role to play.
Therapeutic. Yeah, so therapeutic, I would probably say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tell me more about that. That sounded like a really curious concept when I was reading about it.
So this is something that I thought about when I was working as a pediatrician, because most of my day, sadly, involved me making kids sad because I had to take blood from them, or they had to go for a scan that was loud and scary, or we had to do some other procedure that involved them being in a situation that's unfamiliar for them and therefore scary. And we have absolutely fantastic play therapists who are trained to help us prepare children for procedures. And they're trained in, aspects of child play and child psychology. And if I was to say to one of the play therapists, I'm going to take blood from this patient at 4:00, would you mind going and have a chat with them? Then at 2:00, they'd go and they'd take materials with them to help prepare that child for the procedure that was going to happen. And that would involve some play and some sort of explanation of the procedure that was going to happen and things like that. The problem is, as with many things in the NHS, sadly, there are only a limited number of play specialists and they're not always available. And in my head, I was thinking, this is such a valuable resource. Is there a way we can have like an alternative if the play therapists aren't available? And what if parents could do a bit of this preparatory work themselves that wasn't just reading a leaflet, which is often what people get given when their child's coming in. Your child's coming in for, blood to be taken. Here's what's going to happen. And it's generally focused at the adult. There might be some stuff about the child, but it's generally a leaflet or something. There's lots of stuff being done with videos and exciting things like that for kids, which is great. But I was like, could we make it about play? And the idea I had was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about button shy games and the concept of 18 card decks and the fact that you can do loads of those. And I wondered, could we make preparation decks that were basically a game, a tool to teach kids about the procedure they were going to have, and they also worked as a distraction technique during the procedure themselves. So the idea will be that on one side of the cards, there will be a cartoon version of this is what's going to happen. So someone will clean your hand, and then someone will do this, and they'll do that in steps. And it'll be accompanied by a thing that the parents can read out. And basically the plan would be the child would put them in order and talk about it with their parents. And two of the cards would be different. And one would be a little certificate card that they can fill in at the end when they've had the procedure. And one is a how am I feeling card. So it lets them, they talk through and they can explain, they can point to the thing about how they're feeling about it. And then the cards flip over and they're essentially like mini Where's Wallies. So that when you're in the procedure, they can be held by the parent. So they can be looking for things in these pictures while someone's doing the procedure. Where's Wally books are very well used in pediatrics for this exact reason.
Is it because it's taking attention away of that primarily?
Yes, exactly. And they're looking for something specifically, and that really helps with like it's a distraction technique essentially. But sometimes the books are locked away, or they get tatty, or we don't have them, or whatever, or they're bulky, and you can't carry like a Where's Wally book in your pocket. So the idea would be you then use these, and each deck would be for a different procedure. So it might be I'm having a plaster cast of my arm. It might be I'm going down for a CT scan, those kind of things. And my plan would be we'll have these and parents will be able to get them. So they can do like preparation for kids in advance of coming to hospital, and they'd be a really like cheap, easy thing to buy because it's an 18 card deck. And also that hospitals will be able to have them on hand so that the people doing the procedure can go and get the deck and take it to the child and say, why don't you have a little look through this while I'm getting all the stuff ready for those times when the play therapist isn't there. And it's never going to be a replacement for them ever, but it will hopefully bridge a gap where there's a need when we don't have that, and allow parents and children to kind of take a bit more agency over the things themselves, because it can be a parent with child thing without another person necessarily getting involved at the early stages, which I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, and presumably these would be, so because they contain a certificate for the child, these would be like a disposable item that you could just produce quite cheap, fairly cheap quality card, I'm guessing.
Yes. Yeah.
In a kind of just wrapped up in some cheap way that you can then just give it to the child and they take it away with them, presumably.
Yes. The dream would be if we could find a plastic card material that can stand up to being wiped with disinfectant wipes, difficult with cards, that you would essentially, you could have those ones, but you could also have ones in like a chest on the ward, and it would be all the procedures. And it would be
right.
And you also then have a stack of the certificate cards, and you go and you give these wipeable ones to the kids. They do all the stuff, they use them, then they all get disinfected and returned. So you've always on hand got that. Nailing that down is the thing that's going to make the difference. But it's one of those things that once we've kind of finished with the game doing at the moment, that's something that we're going to be moving forward with, and taking forward to the NHS and charities to try and make into it a thing.
And is this a product you're developing effectively at Stone Sword, or is this a separate kind of thing?
We're doing it under kind of the umbrella of Stone Sword, but I think it will probably end up being something that's another like parallel company or another parallel thing eventually, so that it's very much kind of the therapeutic arm of Stone Sword Games, if you like.
Yes, indeed, makes a lot of sense. Well, I mean, I think it's a very different market. It's a very
definitely.
I mean, we're talking here complete chalk and cheese. I mean, the goals of what you're trying to achieve. I mean, play might be the medium, but then you've got very different goals there with a very incredibly different market. So
but it's one of those products that to be able to make a product like that, you have to have a fairly specific set of skills. And I feel like I have that set of skills in that I have the knowledge to do the medical bits, and I have the game design knowledge and the ability, because of where I'm working, that puts us in a really good position to do that. And I think it's going to be a really exciting thing moving forward, which can hopefully bring some good to situations that aren't pleasant for people.
Yeah, well, I would say how many people who are game developers, employed as game developers, who are also pediatricians, that's quite a unique cross section. So
I don't think there's many of us.
There are probably not too many, so I suspect you're quite safe there. You're not about to be suddenly drowned in 100 different competitors. As good as that would be for the children, though,
exactly.
It would certainly be something where I suspect you will be working on that one as a focus at some point. That's great. That's really cool. I think it's again such an imaginative, powerful use of that. And again, using play to do that, I think it's just such a cool idea. And it seems like an eminently practical one as well, even in the more disposable form of it, that, you can just produce those, give them out. It's great.
I think it's one of those things, it could be used as a promotional item. It could be used by charities so that it actually can be adapted to their colors and their logos and those kind of things. So that's kind of what we're going to go for, and making it something that's very malleable. Has the same end effect, but can be used for raising awareness of certain things.
Absolutely brilliant idea. And have you got other kind of ideas in your kind of your pipeline, so to speak, of things where you're thinking other applications for this kind of thing in play in the medical context?
So we do. I think that it's one of those things that it's a tricky world, because if you are being factual about something and you're explaining what's going to happen, that's different. When you get into the world of using it as a more therapeutic tool, things like diagnostics or teaching somebody how to do a procedure, that suddenly goes into the world of medical devices. And so you've got to be really careful, because what we're making here is not a medical device. It's no different to a leaflet. It just happens to be a game. Whereas if I was then making a thing that was like, oh, we're now going to give 18 card decks to medical students to teach them how to take blood from somebody, that's a whole different like sphere of research and regulation that you would need to go through. So as much as I would love for that to be a thing, I think especially for a small company, that's just not a viable thing for us to do. Now, if this product took off and we had people that were interested in developing that who did have those links, then that would be something that I'd be very interested in, because I've always been interested in teaching medical students and nursing students and allied healthcare professionals. So that would be another potential, but not for us at the moment, I don't think.
Yeah, makes total sense, to be honest. I mean, I have a friend who works in the medical device space, and he's working on a really fascinating project, which is to do with treating people with epilepsy using music.
Very exciting.
And it turns out that they're able to outperform quite a lot of drugs using music that's calibrated to their brainwaves. It's really fascinating specs.
That's cool. That's really cool.
It's really, really cool. But the problem is that even though it's just a scan and then music, that's still classed as a medical device. So there's a huge amount of bureaucracy to navigate to make that work, even though the possible risks of it, I mean, compared to drugs, are incredibly low. So are really, really low, astronomically low. So it's really interesting to think again that as soon as you're in that space, you've got to start navigating that issue. So probably best just to stick to the kind of leaflet replacement, at least for now. Yeah.
That's it. We do. So in the pipeline as well, parallel again to that product is watch this space. If anybody's interested in gardening, there's going to be an 18 card gardening product coming your way from us as well in the very near future.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to keep an eye on that one. That sounds going to be like, that's very, very interesting. You'll just have to tease us with that for now.
I will for now.
So before we kind of wrap up, I want a couple of things. I think the first question I want to ask is if someone was to get into being a game developer, obviously you've had quite a unique path, but what can you take from your unique path that you could recommend others if they really want to get into more the development side of things?
A huge amount of getting into this industry is getting stuck in and being kind. And honestly, I think if you can keep those two things in your mind when you approach anything with trying to get into the industry, you're not going to go far wrong. What I would say is my first thing was that I was like, oh, this looks like a cool thing, but no one's ever done it here. Let's give it a go. If you can find something, anything that's like, oh, this is a bit different, and you're like, oh, no one's ever done it, don't just instantly think it's been tried and it failed. It could just be no one's ever done it before. And that can be anything. That could be like, a certain design project you want to do, or it could be an event like I did. And I think that like looking for those opportunities and getting stuck into them is really important, because you'll meet people through that then in a few years down the road, they might have a link that you never even realized. And it's such a small industry that by meeting people and doing it in like a genuine way, not literally like, not networking per se, obviously that's important, but more just being enthusiastic about the things you enjoy and showing genuine interest in other people's what they're doing will stand you in great stead, because they'll remember that. And if you're genuinely passionate about it, it might be they've got a tiny project that they need a hand with, and you're like, oh, I could spare an hour a week to do that. Yeah, I'll get involved in that. And then next time they need someone to do it, now it's 2 hours a week. And it might be a gradual introduction into the industry, which is very much the more normal route into tabletop games. I've been very lucky, and every day I realize that I have been very fortunate to get to where I am now. And it's, as I say, it's timing, it's lots of other things. So don't be disheartened if you are trying to do these things and that hasn't yet happened. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong necessarily. It just means that that opportunity is still out there for you. It's just not shown itself yet. So yeah, be kind, be passionate, be honest, and like just do it because you love it. And I know that sounds a little bit pie in the sky perhaps, but I honestly think that's what makes people take notice of what it is you're doing or want to do.
Well, I think people can sense whether it's genuine or not most of the time. I guess unless you're a complete psychopath and you're very good at at giving off a sense of authenticity that isn't there.
Yeah.
For most people, they will only be able to know that people will be able to sense whether something is authentic or not. I mean, this is a strong sense I have whenever I meet people. If they're coming into tabletop and they are thinking maybe it's just a money opportunity or something, which is a terrible plan in general, but if they were thinking that you can often sense pretty quickly that they don't really have that genuine interest, or they have a kind of slightly more selfish approach to it. And I've found that as well. If you're prepared to kind of give, to get involved, to be passionate, to offer help, that's really the best way to do it in whatever way. And then everyone's path does tend to be very weird. Mine very much from a kind of formal product management background is, for example, very different to yours. So it is this just extraordinary variety, but that commonality of passion and genuine interest, I think, seems to be something that's consistently coming up across many of these conversations.
And it's one of the things that makes the tabletop industry so interesting, because there's no single route in. Everybody is so different. And this is the thing about, like, I don't know if you found it with your previous work, but in medicine, every person I was in medicine with for the past 12 years, we've all done the same thing. We've literally done almost the same thing to the point where we've all done the same exams and we've all done the same thing. Whereas in tabletop gaming, you will come in and you'll meet people who've done things that you would never have imagined, and they'll have great stories and you'll have a great time. Just like if you're a people person and you enjoy learning about people, it's such a wonderful way to do it while also getting to do some game stuff. Like, it's the dream, right?
Oh, certainly. That's one of the really cool things I think about the industry in general, is the number of characters that you meet who have very, very wide-ranging backstories. I mean, I think for me, interestingly, product management is also another one of those disciplines where you get people from quite a wide variety of spaces.
Interesting, yeah.
But again, I would, however, say if you were where the industry I was in before, which was advertising, is very much an industry where people, again, have a somewhat similar background, are moving between all the same companies. It's probably not quite as regimented as that very, very strict path that exists in medicine is, but nonetheless is more common. Games are definitely a kind of collection of renegades, very much is kind of how I see the games industry.
But I think that's what gives it the life it has, and that's what makes it really interesting, and I love that, and that's why I love going to conventions and play testing and stuff. You just get to meet people, and that's one of the most, I think personally, it's one of the most rewarding things you can do in your life, is to find out about the people and to just learn cool stuff about them. So
100%. 100% indeed. And what should we be looking for from you coming up soon? What should we be keeping an eye on? Should we be keeping an eye on prep decks? Is it what? And you said that the Cosmoctopus Kickstarter, that's going to happen soon?
Yep. So Cosmoctopus Kickstarter will kick off on the 25th of October. And so that'll be running for 3 weeks. So please watch out for that. The preview page is already up if you Google it. And then after that, we're going to be focusing on, from a kind of parallel point of view, the prep decks will definitely be the next thing, and then maybe the gardening thing. But also we are currently trying to get hold of a couple of IPs for games, which we may well be announcing next year if that goes well. And also next year, hopefully we're bringing out one of my own games, which the team felt was worthy of being published. So that'll probably be towards the tail end of next year. So Cosmo is the main thing we're aiming for at the moment, and it's all speed ahead on that, and I'm very excited to get it out there in the world.
You're going to be a very busy man, it sounds like, over the next few months and year plus, from the sound of it.
Definitely, I definitely am going to be in that situation. And then obviously on top, in the spare time, we've got Protospiel coming up in November.
Yes, let's not forget the convention as well, which will have significantly multiplied in size as well.
Yeah, hopefully. And we'll hopefully have some speakers coming to that as well, which would be nice. And yeah, being supported by Panda this year kindly, and the Game Crafter is sending us a big box of bits again, as they did last time. So there'll be lots of things to play with, and you might even be able to make a whole game during the weekend and get it play tested. Who knows?
Oh wow, that's really cool. Well, I mean, to be honest, I was planning to come anyway, but I think 100% I'll come along now. Like, that sounds really cool.
I think it'd be cool to have a game jam within the convention with something like that, which I'm trying to plan. So just a simple kind of, in your downtime, if you want to make a game, why not? Let's all see what we can make. Yeah,
definitely. That sounds absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so really looking forward to that. And it's, as I say, that's all the combination of things I love: games, getting to meet people, and doing an event. So yeah, looking forward to that a lot.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a real pleasure. I think particularly great to give people a bit more insight into how developing works and some of the really cool stuff you're working on.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Producing Fun is produced by Naylor Games. If you enjoyed the show, follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, or other major podcasting platforms. Remember, Producing Fun is also a product, and it thrives on feedback. so please leave a review wherever possible, or simply send me your feedback directly. You can message me on Twitter @NaylorJames, or write me an email, james@naylorgames.com. Until next time.